Welcome to the Falling Star Guide. You can purchase this model for your own animations right now. If you have already, then thank you very much for supporting my work. This guide shows you all the features and how to use them as I intended them to be used, but of course, you can change anything and everything about this model, but I do recommend keeping a backup before you do so. First off, let's open the Blender file. Here you will find the Falling Star spaceship and two copies of the pilot, one standing and one already sitting in the cockpit. But you probably already have a file for your animation. So to add this to your project, you can use the append feature. In your project, go to File, Append, and navigate to where you stored the Falling Star file. Select Collections and select the Falling Star collection, and you will see a complete mess. This is because by default, Blender will add everything as enabled and collections as open. I structured the tree of collections in a very specific way. Essentially, the different moving parts each have their own collections within collections to make things organized. To make all this look a lot cleaner, first I recommend disabling relationship lines in the Viewport Overlays drop-down menu. Now we'll look at the collections themselves. Features such as the landing gear and flaps have armatures and empties which animate the mesh. These are stored in collections labelled Hide, and that's because you won't need to see them. There are separate empties which control the animations, so it's safe to go through and hide all of these collections and collapse everything else to get something a lot cleaner looking. Let's look at the Falling Star, so we'll hide the two pilot models for now. Whenever animating the ship, I strongly recommend using the origin anchor to move it. I designed the ship in such a way that everything will be parented to this as opposed to the main body of the Falling Star itself. And as you can see, grabbing the base of the model leaves everything else behind. If the model is too big or too small for your scene, you can rescale the entire thing by changing the scale of the origin anchor and of the rigs in the pilot collections. Now onto the cool stuff. The engine thrust. Each flame effect has its origin point where it connects with the rest of the model. This means you can simply scale the objects to change the length of the flames, as I locked the scale of the X and Z axis. As a sneak preview to the materials, you can also animate the flames themselves by adding keyframes to the flame animation parameters. Each flamer has separate materials so the flame effects can be randomized, as opposed to all the flames being identical. And that brings us onto the torpedo, which has an identical material for its flame, only I've given it a different color. The torpedo is positioned in line with the launcher of the Falling Star. You can simply move it back on the Y-axis to seat it perfectly inside the rest of the model. And of course, you can scale down the size of the flames to 0 when it's idle. One more thing to note is the torpedo has a child of constraint, parenting it to the Falling Star. This is useful if you want to show it in the launcher, but you can change the influence to 0 to animate it independently. Onto the wings. First we have the air brakes. I've used actions to animate the air brakes, flaps and landing gear with empties as controllers, so all you need to do is to move the relevant empties to control them. The air brake controllers are above the wing engines. Simply move them back and forth to control the animation. The same goes for the landing gear, my favourite feature of the model. Each one has its own controller which you can move up and down. The flaps and braces use the same technique. Simply move the sphere empties up and down to change the angle of the flaps, and use the arrow empties to slide the flaps in and out. To imitate recoil, you could use the empties to animate the cannons, moving back and forth. Another couple smaller details, you could also animate the rotation of the turbines and the wingtips. I've also added these lights, which are a combination of an emissive material along with standard Blender spotlights. Let's have a look inside. Use the empty on the canopy to slide it forwards and we'll see a fully modelled interior. At the front we have a control panel and pedals. Both can be moved back and forth to accommodate different sized characters. The joysticks and pedals can also be moved independently. If the character uses a Rigify rig, you can parent them to the Falling Star model using the child of constraints. First, position your model to sit in the Falling Star, then select your rig in object mode and add a child of constraint, with the origin anchor as the target. Now your model will move with the Falling Star. Then go into pose mode, select the hand bones, and in the bone constraints menu, add a child of constraint. You then want to select the joystick empties as your targets. Now when you animate the joysticks, the hands will move with them. And if your character needs to let go, you can simply keyframe the influence of the child of constraint. The same technique can be applied to the feet, using a child of constraint to parent the bones to the pedal empties. Then moving the pedal empties will move the feet. I also want to mention that several parts of this model have limit rotation and limit distance constraints enabled to lock the range of motion. This is mainly to stop different parts clipping, but they can all easily be adjusted or disabled completely. A final nifty feature of the Falling Star ship is a POV camera. On the control panel, I've added this screen here, which can be used as a heads-up display. You may have noticed a camera parented to the front of the model. With this camera selected in the Scenes menu, you can render out a POV video of the spaceship. Add an overlay and effects in editing software, import it back as a material node, and connect it to the color and emission color of a printable BSDF with emission strength set to something low. This way it adds illumination like a real screen. I've added 2 copies of the pilot, one sitting and one standing, just to save time having to repose them. You could disable either one you don't need, or both if you're using your own characters. Both use the standard Blender Rigify rig, and each bone can be keyframed and animated however you wish. Just a general tip, make sure to have individual origins selected when posing multiple bones. Every single material in this model is procedural, with no extra assets needed, so you can use the materials on whatever you want. I've assembled each one into a group to make things easier and faster to customize. You can press tab on each group to see every single node, but the options I've selected should be enough to customize the materials to your liking. So let's go through the preset options. The texture scale setting. You should really only need to use this if you use the material on other objects besides the falling star. Next you have the material colors. By default the primary colors are red and orange, but say I want this to be a more militaristic grey, without the gradient. Well, I choose the grey I want first, then I click and drag the color onto the orange to replace it. To reset the colors, you can hover your cursor over the color settings and press backspace. Next you have the standard metallic and roughness settings, followed by edge weathering settings and dirt settings. These can be used to create realistic looking imperfections. Finally, there's the bump settings, which can add just a little bit more roughness to the texture. And that's about it for this tutorial. As a bonus tip for getting this thing to fly, I recommend using paths. Simply add a path, scale it up, select the origin anchor and add a follow path constraint. Rotate the falling stars to face the right way, select animate path, and you're on your way. Thank you for watching and thank you very much for supporting my work. Stay tuned because I have a whole lot more planned for the future. Alright everyone, enjoy the next 24 hours.